A soprano collapses mid-aria. Was it fate or murder? Welcome to Shadow Files. I am your host, Kyle. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Your comments mean the world to me. Now let's begin. The chandelier of the Grand Opera glittered like a constellation suspended in velvet night. Beneath its glow, London's most distinguished gathered: ministers of state, society matrons in pearls, critics armed with sharpened pens, and a sea of eager opera devotees. The occasion was nothing less than the debut of La Belle Hélène under the baton of Maestro Bellini, a man whose temper was as legendary as his genius. As the orchestra swelled, anticipation rose to a fever pitch. Then, at the heart of the stage, a figure of unmatched brilliance appeared. Madame Estelle Reynard, the celebrated soprano from Paris, raised her chin, her gown shimmering like moonlight. The first notes escaped her lips. Pure, crystalline, arresting. The audience, spellbound, leaned forward as one. But as the aria climbed to its triumphant peak, something faltered. A quiver in her voice, a sudden pallor. Estelle clutched at her throat, stumbled 2 steps forward, and collapsed to the stage floor. For a stunned instant the theatre remained silent, the orchestra faltering into discord. Then came the shrieks, the gasps, the chaos. "Doctor! Fetch a doctor!" cried the impresario, his face white with horror. Several rushed forward, but the soprano lay motionless, her arm outstretched in tragic finality. Within minutes, the whispers coursed through the gilded balconies. Poison, murder, sabotage. The curtain fell abruptly, not with applause, but with a collective shudder. For among those seated that evening, a pair of sharp, watchful eyes gleamed beneath their immaculately groomed brows. Hercule Poirot, lately persuaded by a wealthy patron to attend the performance, sat very still. His fingers tapped lightly upon the handle of his cane. "Mon Dieu," he murmured softly as the audience surged in confusion around him. A tragedy in C major, but perhaps, not certainly, this is not mere tragedy. It is crime. And with that, the little Belgian leaned forward, the celebrated petite cellules grises already stirring. Notes that would not be written into any score. Poirot rose, smooth and unhurried amid the frantic rustle of silk and the scrape of hastily drawn chairs. He allowed the tide of onlookers to carry him down the aisle, but he was a still point within it, observing as he moved. Who stared, who pressed forward, who slipped away toward the side exits with the guilty stealth of a cat. At the orchestra pit, the musicians set down their instruments with childlike care, faces pale beneath the footlights. The curtain, brought down with a clatter of pulleys, trembled as if the theatre itself was shivering. A man in a black tailcoat, hair lacquered to a gleam and eyes ringed with sleepless ambition, hurried out from the wings and thrust himself towards the front. "Please, ladies and gentlemen," he cried, hands up in a pantomime of control, "there has been a medical emergency. I must ask you to remain calm and to return to your seats." His mouth smiled while his eyes searched for escape. Poirot had seen bankers look so when markets faltered. "You are the impresario," Poirot said, gently interposing himself. "Lionel Barrington," the man answered, breath clouding faintly in the cool draughts. Good heavens, Madame Reynard, if this is a feint, a mere feint." His voice failed. "Assume not," Poirot murmured. "Where is the house physician?" "Already with her." Dr. Keats. He was in his box. Barrington swallowed, the tendons in his neck stringing tight. We must keep order." "The press." "The police first," said Poirot, and because the little man's calm had weight, Barrington spun and snapped his fingers at an usher, dispatching him at once. Poirot, satisfied, slipped behind the curtain into a world of ropes and catwalks, the pulsed breath of machinery, the dry smell of dust and glue that lies behind grandeur. On the stage, Estelle Reynard's body had been shielded by a folding screen hastily erected by 2 stagehands, obedient to Doctor Keats, who knelt with his bag at his side. The doctor's face was set in the familiar mask of the professional who has found the boundary of his usefulness. He closed his stethoscope with a click that sounded indecently loud. "Doctor," Poirot said softly. Keats glanced up, taking in the neat moustaches, the immaculate tie, and the self-possession that did not relax even before death. "Gone," he said without preamble. "No head injury, no obvious trauma. A collapse, rapid. The pupils, well, I cannot certify a cause. I would prefer not to touch more than I must." "Fortunate," Poirot returned, "for there will be those whose duty it is to touch. Meanwhile, we preserve the order. No dressing-room door to be opened except to admit the police. No one leaves the theatre." He turned and found the stage manager, a thick-set man with a pencil behind his ear and anxiety crushed into the lines around his mouth. "You're in command of the movements here, yes?" "Tom Beale, sir." "Huh?" The man's gaze flicked to the screen and away. "My God, we was bang on the cue. Props accounted for, nothing out of the ordinary, until that Poirot considered him a moment." Beale's hands were clean, unlike the cuffs of his shirt, darkened with honest grime. He radiated a practical despair. "You will do as I say," Poirot told him. "Collect the following and keep them in the green room. You will stand at the door yourself with a man you trust. Those called to the stage may pass, but no one else. The conductor, the leading tenor, the understudy to Madame Reynard, her dresser, the wardrobe mistress, the prompter, the first violin, the critic from the Gazette. I saw him in the front stalls. Mr. Felix Armitage, is it not? And Mr. Barrington. I will add to this list, but begin." Beale nodded, gratefully, as men do when given a task rather than a terror, and strode away, snapping orders that bit the air. Poirot found himself, as he so often did, quietly at the fulcrum. He looked once at the screen. "Madame," he said beneath his breath, "forgive that I make of your tragedy an arrangement of chairs." He lifted his gaze to the dangling battens, to the grid where a light still swayed. But the order, it is everything. Constables entered with the crispness of the night air on their uniforms, and with them strode a sturdy, square-shouldered man whose manner contained the reassurance of old acquaintance. "Well, well," he said dourly, surveying the scene. "I had a night off. I might have known London couldn't last an evening without obliging me. Mr. Poirot, Chief Inspector," Poirot acknowledged with a little bow. "You come with punctuality that is melodious." "Jap," the inspector supplied to those within earshot who were not already acquainted, and compressed his lips at the screen. "House doctor says sudden collapse, surrounded by props, faint smell of—" He broke off. "We'll know when we know. Meanwhile, I'm told you've started a roll call, merely that the circle should be closed before it begins to widen," Poirot said. "If it is nothing, we will have taken trouble. If it is something, but I think it is something, then we shall have confided the suspects to a comfortable room." Jap grunted, which in him signified indulgent consent. "No one out then? We'll take statements. Green room, is it?" "It is," Poirot said, and they went together. The green room had the faded intimacy of a club that has seen too many triumphs and too many heartbreaks. 70s upholstered in a pattern of climbing roses sagged beneath the weight of performers' nervous energy. Now that energy was turned inward, it shivered and pricked and found refuge in the rattle of teacups and the blunt ends of cigarettes smoldering into saucers. The faces that lifted as Poirot and Jap entered were a study in variants of fear. Maestro Bellini stood apart, a handsome man in his 50s with the silvered temples of a conqueror and the expression of one who has just found the citadel empty. He held a baton as though it were a cigarette for which he had no taste. Near him, Vittorio Alonso, the tenor, wrapped his velvet cloak around himself like a lover. His fine mouth tightened at the corners in what might be grief or vanity. On a chair by the dressing screens sat Lila Hart, the understudy, a pale English rose faced toward a draught. She was very still. Only her hands betrayed her in their deliberate lacing and unlacing. A woman in a severe black dress, Madame Kovach, the wardrobe mistress, watched Lila with the remote concern of a governess, while a large-shouldered, freckled girl, Nora Blake, Estelle's dresser, stared fixedly at her own knees. Mr. Barrington took up a position by the mantel as if portraits might defend him. The first violin, a quiet man with a philosopher's forehead named Mr. Hale, sat with his case on his lap, as though it were a shield. In the corner, his pen already unsheathed, Mr. Felix Armitage, the critic, looked up with keen eyes that measured the scene as copy before compassion. Near the door hovered a woman whose jewels were too fine for the back rooms, and whose chin lifted at an unaccustomed angle. Lady Octavia Vaughan, principal patron of the season. "Thank you," Japp said briskly. "We'll do this plainly. I'm Chief Inspector Japp. You're here as persons who had immediate proximity to events on the stage or behind it. No one's accusing anyone of anything. You'll tell the truth, and we'll be done sooner. Mr. Poirot will listen." He does that rather well. Poirot inclined his head and let the silence stretch enough for vanity to shrink. Then he said, "The tragedy is fresh. I ask no long statements, only your movements from 1 hour before the curtain until the moment of Madame Reynard's collapse. And, this is of importance, your feelings where they are strong. In the theatre, the passions, they are the props that change hands most frequently." Bellini laughed once, without mirth. "I conduct music, not hearts," he said. "But I will tell you this. The rehearsal this afternoon was a circus. Estelle came late. She would not take direction. She quarreled with Alonso because he, attempted to improve upon Offenbach. She called me a tyrant. I called her names. In Italy, we throw them like rice. And yet, Vittorio Alonso purred, you bowed to her in the wings before the first act. Like a devotee before an altar, Bellini's nostrils flared. Because the performance must live even if the performers hate each other." Poirot's glance drifted, apparently idle, to Lila Hart. "Mademoiselle," her voice came in a controlled thread, "I was in Estelle's dressing room when she arrived at 6:20. Nora had laid out the Act 1 gown. Madame Kovach brought the new corsage. Estelle sent me to the call board to check the order of the arias. I returned. At 5 to 7, Maestro knocked, and they quarreled, lightly. At 1:15, Mr. Barrington came with Lady Octavia. At 1:30, Estelle warmed her voice. At 5 to 8, she went to the wings. I followed because I liked to watch. She pressed her hands together to still them. I did not touch anything of hers. Only the little throat spray on the vanity. I tidied it into the tray. Nora Blake darted a glance at Lila, then away. Poirot saw it drop like a bead of mercury and roll into the cracks between them. "You, Mademoiselle Nora?" he asked gently. "I came on at 6, the girl said, voice roughened by swallowed tears. "Madame was sweet, to me today. Better than most days. She said, 'Nora, you will come to Paris with me when this run is finished.' She had letters. She gave me one to post, but then took it back. Said she would deal with it later. She had..." Nora hesitated. "She had nerves. She always did, but tonight worse. She sent for tea and then did not drink it. She said her heart beat too fast. Barrington seized on that like a drowning man on driftwood. There. Nerves. A faint. I told you." "Let us not compose the verdict before we have heard the orchestra," Poirot reproved mildly. "Madame Kovach?" The wardrobe mistress nodded once. The corsage, she said, with the simple economy of one who has stitched through tears before. Lady Octavia provided it. White camellias and one gardenia. They stain. I warned the maid. I pinned it myself at Estelle's breast. She winced. The pin scratched. She laughed and called me butcher. I do not think I am a butcher. Nor do I, said Poirot, and turned to the patroness. Lady Octavia. She met his look with the impatience of a woman used to purchasing deference. I admire art, she said. I admire excellence. I do not admire scenes. I informed Estelle this afternoon that donors had concerns about her behavior. That is, about her recent affectations of divahood. She replied with rudeness and implied that if London could not appreciate her, Paris would. I brought the flowers as a gesture to avoid unpleasantness. I am not accustomed to being suspected of melodrama. You are suspected of nothing, Poirot said soothingly. Only of humanity, which includes gestures. He let the word hang and drifted his attention to the critic, whose pen had scratched a note at Paris. Mr. Armitage, he said. Armitage folded his notebook with a smile that never touched his eyes. I came to hear genius, he said. I stay to hear tragedy. I lunched with Estelle yesterday for a profile. She hinted that she might announce an engagement of another sort at the close of the run, a contract abroad or a marriage. She liked to flirt with possibilities. She asked what London would say if she abruptly deserted it. I told her London would say exactly what I would write. And what would you write? Japp demanded. That betrayal is the dullest form of scandal, Armitage replied. It rarely improves the betrayed. Vittorio Alonso shifted, cloak whispering. She would not have left, he said softly. Estelle feared to lose her audience. She feared more than she loved. This is not a criticism. It is a comprehension. Poirot's eyes warmed a degree. You speak as one who understands the stage, he murmured. And your movements this evening. I visited her at 7, Alonso said. We quarreled in Italian, which sounds like love to English ears. It was neither. She was upset. She asked me if I had spoken to the maestro about certain tempi. I said yes. She told me to think of my own notes. I kissed her hand, not affection, habit, and went to the wings. Mr. Hale, Japp asked, ticking boxes in his head. The first violin's voice was almost apologetic. I tuned. I keep to myself. I spoke to no one except the concertmaster. He hesitated. But I heard, through the fly gallery, someone crying not long before the overture, a woman, not violent, controlled, as if she had put the tears on a leash. All eyes moved, almost imperceptibly, to Lila Hart. Her pale lashes did not flutter. It was not I, she said, very quietly. Then it was I, Nora blurted suddenly, in a burst of guilt. I cry when I'm happy or frightened. I had never seen Madame so kind. She looked down, abashed by her own confession. Poirot inclined his head as though someone had played the note he expected. And you, Mr. Barrington, he asked, you came with Lady Octavia at 7:15. Your purpose? To impress upon Estelle the importance of tonight, Barrington said stiffly. She was capricious. There were rumors of a rival house making offers. I reminded her of her contract. She threatened to break it. We reached an understanding. We did not, Lady Octavia said with the candor of the exasperated. She reached impertinence. Enough, Japp said, in the voice that made lesser men remember they stood on Scotland Yard's time. The lot of you will write accounts. Brief, factual. Mr. Beale will fetch paper. He paused, then added grudgingly, Mr. Poirot, anything further? For now. Poirot's gaze travelled the room once more, gathering, arranging, aligning. He saw the tremor in Lila Hart's fingers brought suddenly under control when Bellini glanced her way. He saw the slight smear of powder on Barrington's lapel, as of a woman's face brushed there. He saw the tiny puncture on Madame Kovach's thumb, bound in a loop of cotton that looked recent. He saw the gardenia pinned at the mantel wilting faster than the camellias, as gardenias do, and he saw most of all the shared calculation, everyone measuring how much to reveal and what to withhold. "If it is permitted," he said, "one thing only." In Madame Reynard's dressing room there is a tray. Upon the tray, a small throat spray in a crystal flask with a silver top. Mademoiselle Hart tidied it. Did anyone see it moved after that? Silence moved like a shadow over faces. Then Bellini shrugged. "I do not enter women's rooms," he said. "I took the tea in and out," Nora ventured, "but I did not touch the tray." "I was there," Madame Kovach murmured. "I adjusted the hem." The spray remained where it sat. "Then," Poirot said, voice the gentlest strand of silk, who placed it in the pocket of Estelle's Act I cloak, where I saw the outline as she crossed herself in the wing. "It is a small thing. Only small things. They point." Japp turned his head. "Interest, like a hooded falcon's." "You're sure of that?" he asked. "As sure as I am that the order will give us the truth," Poirot replied. He rose. "Chief Inspector, with your leave, I will go now to the dressing room to regard the order before too many eyes disturb it. Mr. Beale, you will accompany me. Mr. Barrington, you will have someone fetch the list of all who had keys to Madame Reynard's room. Lady Octavia, may your maid bring me the florist's card from your corsage box. Monsieur Alonso, Maestro, you will kindly remain." He moved to the door, then paused and turned back, his eyes resting for an instant on Lila Hart. Her face was very composed, as if she had arranged it in the mirror and left it on. "Courage, mademoiselle," he said, and it was impossible to tell for whom the comfort was meant. "The little grey cells, they have begun their work." The corridors behind the Grand Opera's stage were narrow, a warren of brick and plaster, where every sound carried oddly, magnified or distorted by the hollow passages. Poirot walked with a measured tread, Beale the stage manager at his side. The man's bulk seemed diminished by unease, his heavy boots clumsy on the boards. Poirot, small and trim, moved as though the floor itself consented to his steps. "Chief Inspector Japp will search for what is obvious," Poirot remarked. "He is excellent at this." "But what is obvious? It is often not the truth, only the costume that disguises it." Beale swallowed, scratching his neck. "You think it's murder, then, sir?" "Not heart or nerves." Poirot's moustache is lifted slightly, like wings at rest. "I think, Mr. Beale, that Madame Reynard's life ended before its natural finale. That is enough. The question is only, how and by whose design?" They stopped before the dressing-room door. A constable stood guard already, young-faced and sharp-eyed. Poirot inclined his head courteously, then produced a small handkerchief and opened the door with care, as though each surface were sacred to the investigation. The room was an island of glamour stranded in the midst of dusty machinery. A gilt-framed mirror, bulbs still glowing faintly, presided over the vanity. Upon its glass hung photographs. Estelle with dignitaries, Estelle smiling beside Alonso, Estelle in Paris salons. On the table, a scattering of powder tins, brushes, rouge, and the throat spray, its silver top catching the light. A porcelain teacup sat half-filled, cooled to a sallow color. The corsage box lay open on the chair, tissue paper folded neatly but hastily discarded. Poirot advanced no further than 2 paces, his eyes darting across surfaces like a master appraiser valuing jewels. "Observe, Beale." The chair, drawn back from the vanity, though the gown hangs from the screen. She sat, rose, sat again. The teacup, touched to the lips but not drained. The throat spray, but that one is of the greatest interest. Its place here on the tray is too precise. When one tidies hurriedly, it is not so exact. No, someone wished it to appear untouched. Beale shifted uneasily. "You've a sharp eye, Mr. Poirot. It is the order that speaks, my friend. Disorder can be accident. Perfect order is intention." Poirot stooped to peer at the floor. "And here, see? A drop, faint but telling, of clear liquid on the linoleum near the hem of the screen. Not tea. It dries differently. Nor scent. It lacks the trace. I suspect something less innocent." He straightened, dusting his fingertips fastidiously. "Mr. Beale, you will kindly make certain no article here is disturbed. I will request of Jap that the spray be tested. But the clue, it is not chemical alone, it is psychological. Who would tamper with that which Estelle most trusted? Her voice was her kingdom, the throat spray her scepter. To tamper with it is to know her soul." Beale frowned. "Could be anyone backstage?" "Folk talk." None, Poirot corrected gently. "It is not gossip that places the hand on the vial. It is knowledge, intimate, certain. We shall return to this. Now let us see what else the room confesses." He approached the corsage box. Inside, a florist's card written in elegant script, "For your triumph." O.V. Poirot read it once, twice, then replaced it. Lady Octavia Vaughan wishes to emphasize her gesture. Yet to send camellias and gardenia. The gardenia fades quickly. It gives the appearance of withering at once. A flower that dies too fast. It is a symbol, perhaps. And Madame Kovach pricked her finger upon the pin. But such scratches are the fate of seamstresses. No, what is of interest is that Madame Reynard laughed. Why laugh, unless nerves had already touched her? Beale scratched his chin. "I'm not one for symbolism, sir." "Then you are fortunate," Poirot said with dry amusement, "for symbols deceive us nearly as much as lies. But let us return. They left the room under guard." The green room murmurs reached them even down the corridor, voices lifted in anxiety and sharp whispers. Poirot paused, listening not to words but to rhythm, the syncopation of nerves. "Do you hear, Beale? The note of harmony is missing. Each voice alone, none blending. This is an orchestra of suspects they entered again." The assembly had rearranged itself, Alonso draped now across the settee like a sulky prince, Bellini pacing with clenched fists, Lady Octavia speaking low and firm to Barrington, who perspired as though under stage lights. Lila Hart sat with folded hands, her gaze fixed on some invisible horizon, while Nora wrung her kerchief. Jap had been taking notes, his pencil scratching like a metronome. He looked up, impatient. "Well, Poirot? Find anything?" "Little and much," Poirot replied. "Enough to suggest that Madame Reynard's death is no act of fate." "The throat spray," Jap groaned. "Not one of your psychological toys, Poirot. If it's poison, the yard will find it. Precisely, mon ami. But psychology tells us who had the reason to put it there. Science will only tell us that it was put," Jap muttered. "But let it pass. You want more statements? Later? For now, permit me to speak to each, not as to witnesses, but as to souls. If you will indulge me." Jap, weary of battling Poirot's methods, gestured assent. Poirot turned first to Maestro Bellini. "Monsieur, you quarrelled, yes, but quarrels in the theatre are the seasoning. Yet you, I think, are a man whose pride is sharper than his baton. Estelle mocked your authority. What then? Did you think to silence her in another way?" Bellini's eyes flashed. "I am not a poisoner. My revenge is tempo, not murder. Ask anyone. Without me, she would have been late by a bar every time." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. Yet pride can do much. We keep this in the ledger." He moved to Alonso. "Monsieur, you kissed her hand. Habit, you said, and yet you quarrelled. Did you love her or envy her?" Alonso spread his hands. "I adored her voice. I tolerated her temper, but she feared me, feared my youth, my applause. She thought I would eclipse her. That is not love. That is war. Poirot's gaze lingered, and wars end in casualties, do they not? He let the silence stretch before addressing Lady Octavia. Madame, you provided flowers. An olive branch, you called it. Yet was it not also a warning? That you and your money could withdraw as easily as you gave? Octavia's chin rose. I do not deny it. She was careless of her patrons. Without us, she would have no stage. I meant to humble her, but murder, that is vulgarity, Poirot said softly, is sometimes a weapon. He turned now to Lila Hart. She did not flinch. Mademoiselle, the understudy. Always near, never center, the shadow to the sun. You placed the spray upon the tray. Did you not resent the mistress who kept you forever in shade? Her pale lips moved. Resentment is not murder. I admired her. She frightened me, yes. She mocked my nerves. But she was greatness. She faltered, eyes dropping. I would not harm her. Poirot studied her a moment longer. And yet you would have had the most to gain. The girl's hands clenched tighter, but she spoke no more. At last, Poirot addressed Nora. You, my child, loved her, perhaps, or feared her. Nora's eyes brimmed. Both. She was cruel some days, kind on others. Tonight she promised me Paris. She made me hope, Poirot nodded gravely. And hope, when crushed, can turn to hatred. He stepped back, surveying them all. Messieurs, mesdames, we are at the overture only, but already the notes clash. Someone here placed the hand upon the instrument of death. For the present, we do not know which hand, but we shall. Japp closed his notebook with a snap. Enough for tonight. We'll hold them here till we've searched the premises and tested that flask. Poirot, if you've finished your theatre, the yard will do its work. Poirot bowed slightly, unoffended. Do so, mon ami, but permit that I remain. For the truth, she is not in the laboratory, but in the human heart, and tonight those hearts beat not with grief, but with secrets. The suspects stirred uneasily at his words. Some looked away, others met his gaze too quickly. Poirot saw each gesture, each silence, and filed them away with infinite precision. As the constables arranged watches and Japp barked orders, Poirot moved to the mantelpiece, where the corsage's gardenia had begun already to brown at the edges. He touched it lightly with his fingertip, then drew back with a faint smile. The flower dies too swiftly, he murmured, and so too did she. But why? Ah, that, my friends, is the melody we must follow. He turned back to the room, his eyes alighting once more on each face. Bellini's scowl, Alonso's smouldering vanity, Octavia's hauteur, Barrington's sweat, Lila's white composure, Nora's trembling loyalty, Hale's watchful quiet, Armitage's calculating pen. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot said softly, the opera is not over. It has only changed its key. And I, Hercule Poirot, intend to conduct it to its finale. The night drew on, yet the grand opera did not sleep. Outside, hansom cabs and motor cars lingered, their lamps casting golden pools on the pavement as clusters of patrons whispered and speculated. The constables kept the crowd at bay, but gossip slipped past the cordon as easily as smoke through a crack. Inside, the theatre pulsed with unease, every corridor echoing with a faint rustle of movement, the cough of a policeman, the creak of a floorboard under anxious feet. Poirot, seated at a small writing desk in the green room, had arranged a row of objects before him like a general reviewing his troops. The florist's card, carefully set aside by Lady Octavia's maid, the tissue from the corsage box, and a fresh sheet of paper upon which he had drawn a circle and inscribed within it the names of all present. His small, precise handwriting looked almost ornamental. Japp, standing with arms folded, regarded him with weary affection. Always with your diagrams, Poirot. What good will circles and names do us? I'd rather have fingerprints. Poirot raised his eyes, luminous with patience. My dear Jap, fingerprints tell you who touched, but not why they touched. For that, we must map the circle of the heart. See, Madame Reynard at the center, we? Around her, these satellites, the impresario Barrington, bound by money, Lady Octavia by pride, Maestro Bellini by wounded authority, Alonso by rivalry, Mademoiselle Hart by ambition, the maid Nora by loyalty, Kovacs by long service, Hale by observation, Armitage by his pen. Each motive is a string, invisible perhaps, but capable of tightening into a noose. Jap grunted. That's all very well, but we still don't know what killed her. The yard chemist will tell us soon enough whether there was poison in that spray. Undoubtedly, Poirot replied calmly. But the question is not merely the poison. It is the psychology of the poisoner. To place it in the throat spray, one must be certain she would use it. That certainty is intimate. It is not the knowledge of a stranger, but of one close at hand. Jap leaned against the mantel, rubbing his chin. You're thinking Nora, then? Or the understudy. They'd know her habits, perhaps. But let us not jump like a cat too quickly. Instead, we walk. We listen. We coax. Poirot lifted the florist's card delicately. This, you see, is inscribed "Au Vi." Lady Octavia Vaughan wishes to show her patronage. Yet, what if the flowers bore another message? In society, the symbols, they are as dangerous as daggers. To give a withering bloom, is it not to hint at decay? Or just poor floristry, Jap muttered. Poirot chuckled softly. Always the practical one. That is why we make such music together. At that moment, the door opened, and Beale entered, removing his cap respectfully. Beg pardon, Inspector. Mr. Barrington's asking for a word. He's worried about the theatre's reputation. Reputation? Blast it, Jap said. He'll have to wait. Poirot, however, raised a hand. No, let us humor him. Bring him in. The man who frets for appearances often betrays the truth. Barrington entered, perspiring anew. He dabbed his brow with a silk handkerchief. Gentlemen, I appeal to you. We must keep this quiet. The papers, if they print that our prima donna collapsed of foul play, tickets will wither, subscriptions will fall. A scandal could ruin us. Poirot regarded him mildly. Monsieur, already the whispers run like rats along the street. What you fear is not the truth, but its appearance. Tell me, did you and Madame Reynard quarrel very violently? Barrington shifted uneasily. She was difficult, yes. She threatened to break her contract, but she would not truly do so. She needed London, or London needed her, Poirot said. Perhaps she hinted at leaving to secure more favorable terms. To play one patron against another, Barrington swallowed. Perhaps. But that is not crime. No, not crime, but motive. You see, Monsieur Barrington, you had more to lose than most. The failure of your season would be your ruin. And if Madame intended to depart, then I would be finished, Barrington admitted, his voice cracking. But for heaven's sake, Poirot, I did not poison her. Poirot's eyes lingered on him a moment, then turned away. We shall see. Barrington retreated, cowed, and Jap shook his head. You've got him rattled, at least. Poirot tapped the florist's card with a fingertip. It is enough for now. The impresario is a man who fears disgrace more than guilt. We file it away. Hours crept past. Statements were written, signed. Constables rotated watch duties. Yet Poirot was not still. He moved quietly among the suspects, speaking a word here, a phrase there, watching, always watching. When Alonso grew too dramatic, Poirot only raised an eyebrow, and the tenor flushed like a scolded child. When Lady Octavia pressed her lips, Poirot praised her generosity with the faintest irony, and she stiffened. He was not interrogating, he was provoking, teasing out the threads that lay beneath their words. At last, he returned to the desk, where Japp waited with fresh news. Preliminary word from the yard, Poirot. The chemist says there's alkaloid traces in the flask. Poison, likely digitalis. Enough to stop a heart. Poirot bowed his head slightly as though acknowledging an expected note in a score. So, it is confirmed. Murder. The declaration hung heavy in the air. The suspects shifted, each face turning paler, tauter. Nora gave a muffled cry. Lila Hart closed her eyes. Alonso swore softly in Italian. Lady Octavia sat like marble, her fan motionless. Poirot stood, smoothing his cuffs. Now we know that Madame Reynard's death was caused by a hand among us. And thus, we look more closely at the movements before the curtain rose. He walked to the circle of suspects, his hands clasped behind him. Consider, if you please, that to poison the throat spray, the culprit must have had access in the dressing room. Who entered there? Lila Hart, yes, to tidy. Nora, to serve. Kovacs, to adjust. Barrington and Lady Octavia, together to speak. Alonso, to quarrel. Maestro, to scold. So many visitors. It is a miracle Madame Reynard had breath left to sing at all. Yet who among them had the opportunity not only to enter, but to be alone long enough to tamper? Japp added, That's the rub. Anyone could have slipped a drop in when her back was turned. We'll need timelines. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Timelines, yes. But more, the psychology. Ask yourself, who among them possessed the intimate knowledge that Estelle relied on that spray before every performance? That is the key. He turned to Lila Hart. Mademoiselle, you tidied the spray into the tray. You knew her habits well. Perhaps you knew too well? Lila's pale face flushed. I did not poison it. I only tidied because I could not bear disorder. She mocked me for it even. But I swear, I did not touch what was inside. Poirot's gaze softened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he faced Nora. And you, child, you brought tea. You saw her nerves. Did she use the spray before you? Nora shook her head fiercely. Not before me. She said she would later, just before the aria. She always did. Poirot nodded, filing this with satisfaction. So, her ritual is confirmed. Maestro Bellini, impatient, flung up his hands. This is madness. Why suspect us all? It could be some stagehand, some intruder. Non, Poirot said, firmly. This crime is not impersonal. It was planned with precision. A stranger could not know the intimacy of her ritual. No, Maestro, our culprit sits within this circle. Japp raised his eyebrows. So which one is it then? Poirot spread his hands. Ah, that I cannot yet say. But I know this. The truth will come not from science alone, but from the contradictions in your stories. Already I have heard 3 small lies. They may be lies of fear or of guilt. We shall see. He let the silence grow deep, almost unbearable, before continuing in a lighter tone. But for tonight, we must rest. The little grey cells, they also require repose. Tomorrow we will continue, and the next act will begin. One by one, the suspects were escorted to separate rooms for the night, under guard. Poirot lingered, alone now, save for Japp. The Belgian straightened his cuffs, glanced once at the mirror where Estelle Reynard's photograph smiled in happier days and sighed. Do you feel it, mon ami? He asked quietly. Feel what? Japp growled. The tension, the tightening, like an overture that builds until it must burst forth into revelation. Someone here trembles beneath the weight of their secret. Another crime, perhaps, will follow, unless we are swift. But patience. Tomorrow the truth begins to sing. Poirot extinguished the lamp with a deft touch. The theatre sank into shadow, its silence as heavy as velvet curtains. Yet in Poirot's mind, the orchestra of suspects continued to play, each note sharper, each discord clearer. And somewhere, in the harmony of lies, the melody of murder waited to be heard. The theatre awoke reluctantly the next morning like an old lion disturbed from its lair. Outside, newspapers blared headlines of opera tragedy and star soprano collapses on stage. Already speculation ran rampant. Was it nerves? Was it scandal? Was it poison? Within the Grand Opera itself, constables held firm at doors and stairwells, keeping curious visitors and gossiping staff from contaminating the ground where suspicion still lingered like stale perfume. Poirot arrived early, as ever immaculate. Grey suit pressed without crease, patent shoes gleaming, mustaches waxed to perfection. He stepped into the green room where Jap nursed a mug of tea and scowled at the morning paper. "They've got it all wrong already," Jap muttered. "One rag saying she died of a broken heart, another's crying arsenic in the champagne. No mention of the spray, thank heaven for that. But it won't be long." Poirot smiled gently. "The public, mon ami. They love drama, but drama is not truth. Our work is to find the harmony beneath the noise, and for that we must begin again. Fresh eyes, fresh ears." He set down his cane and drew out his notebook. The suspects would be brought in, one by one, not to repeat their statements, but to face Poirot's peculiar art of conversation, the kind that slipped under armor and tugged at hidden threads. The first to appear was Maestro Bellini. He swept into the room as though it were his stage, cloak thrown back, silvered hair gleaming. Yet his eyes were shadowed. Pride was armor, but worry crept beneath. "Maestro," Poirot said warmly, "you are most punctual." "It is a virtue in music, is it not?" Bellini inclined his head. "Without punctuality there is no orchestra. And yet without flexibility there is no art," Poirot returned. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, if you please. I would speak with you, not as a suspect, but as one artist to another. Tell me, what was Estelle Reynard to you?" Bellini stiffened. A voice of rare brilliance, a temperament of rare difficulty. "She fought me at every bar. She resented my corrections as though a singer could rule the orchestra." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "And yet you bowed to her before the performance. Because the audience must see unity. Discord, you hide behind the curtain." "Unless," Poirot said softly, "the discord is too sharp to conceal." Bellini leaned forward. "Are you implying I murdered her?" "Nonsense. I may wish to strangle singers in rehearsal, but I would never, never poison my own star." Poirot inclined his head. "Then, Maestro, one final question. Did you see anyone touch the spray upon her table?" Bellini hesitated just a fraction too long. "No," he said at last. "I did not." Poirot smiled. "Merci, Maestro. You may go." As Bellini swept out, Poirot jotted a note. The lie is small, but it is there. Why does he conceal? Next was Vittorio Alonso, the tenor. He entered like a conquering hero, though his eyes darted nervously. He took the chair as though it were a throne, one leg crossed elegantly. "Signor Alonso," Poirot began, "you and Madame Reynard quarreled, yes?" Alonso spread his hands. "Quarrel? That is the language of passion. We are artists. We quarrel in color." "It was nothing," Poirot leaned forward. "And yet you were heard to say she feared your youth, your applause." "That is not color, monsieur. It is rivalry." Alonso's face tightened. "Perhaps. But rivalry does not mean murder. I loved her voice. Without her, who will match me on stage?" Poirot tilted his head. "Perhaps someone else, eh? An understudy, perhaps? If Estelle were gone, might not Lila Hart step into her place?" And who would shine brightest beside her? Why, the handsome tenor, Alonso laughed harshly. The girl? She is pale, trembling. She cannot bear the gaze of the stalls. She is no star, Poirot observed him a moment. Then it is fortunate for you, she is not. You may go, monsieur. When Alonso left, Poirot wrote another line. He protests too much, yet he gains nothing by her death, unless he fears her exposure of something else. Lady Octavia Vaughan came next, resplendent even at morning, her jewels winking coldly. She sat upright, chin high, every inch the patroness, whose checks kept the opera alive. Lady Octavia, Poirot said smoothly, you were candid last night. You disapproved of Estelle Reynard's behavior. You wished to humble her. Octavia lifted her chin further. I did. She was insolent. She treated patrons as servants. I warned her she could not toy with London as she had with Paris. And so you sent flowers. Camellias and a gardenia. Why a gardenia? Octavia frowned. Because they are fashionable. Why do you ask such nonsense? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Because the gardenia fades swiftly. It dies almost as soon as it blooms. Was that your message, madame? That her glory would fade if she defied you? Octavia's lips thinned. You are impertinent, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps, Poirot said, bowing slightly. But impertinence is the key to truth. You may go. As she swept out, Poirot wrote, her pride is great, but her method is not poison. She would rather ruin with money than with chemistry. The door opened timidly, and in stepped Nora, the maid. She looked smaller in daylight, her eyes red from tears. She clutched her kerchief like a talisman. Mademoiselle Nora, Poirot said kindly. Come, sit. You loved Madame Reynard, did you not? Nora nodded, tears brimming. Yes, she could be cruel, but I loved her. Last night she was kind. She promised to take me to Paris. I would never hurt her. Poirot leaned gently. And yet, child, kindness can be a trap. It can make us fear loss so deeply that anger grows. Did you touch the spray? Nora shook her head fiercely. No, I swear it. Poirot reached across and patted her hand. Courage. The truth will protect you. You may go, he sighed as she left. Too simple, too guileless. Yet even innocence can hide a desperate act. Madame Kovacs followed the wardrobe mistress, stern and silent. She stood rather than sat, hands clasped. You pinned the corsage, Poirot said. You pricked your finger. I did, she replied evenly. You knew the flowers came from Lady Octavia. Did you suspect them? Her lips tightened. I suspected nothing. My duty is to clothe singers, not to judge flowers. The scratch was accident. I have many such. Poirot studied her. And you loved Madame Reynard? Kovacs' eyes softened briefly. I served her. That is not the same. Poirot inclined his head. Service is loyalty of its own kind. Thank you, madame. She departed, leaving behind the faint smell of starch and camphor. Poirot wrote, a woman of duty, capable of bitterness, but not of subtle murder. At last, Lila Hart entered. She moved quietly, almost drifting, her pale gown making her look spectral in the morning light. She sat without prompting, folding her hands in her lap. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, you were Estelle Reynard's understudy. You admired her, yes? Lila's lips trembled. I admired her voice. I feared her temper. And you longed for the stage, yourself? Yes, she whispered, but not like this. Poirot leaned closer. You tidied the spray. You touched it last. Did you ever envy her enough to think the stage should be yours? Tears welled in her eyes. I envied her every day, but I never wished her dead. I only wished she might look at me kindly. Once, just once, Poirot's gaze was kind, but his words were steel. And yet, mademoiselle, envy can poison the heart as surely as digitalis poisons the blood. She covered her face, weeping silently. Poirot let her weep, then rose and bowed. Go, child. We are not finished. When the door closed, Japp slammed his mug down. Well, you've twisted them inside out, Poirot, but we're no closer to naming the killer. They've all got tempers and motives, but no proof. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but we are closer, Japp. Already the contradictions reveal themselves. Bellini lies about entering the room. Alonso denies ambition he wears like a cloak. Octavia uses flowers as weapons. Lila admits envy too quickly, too tragically. These are notes in a score. Soon the melody of truth will play. Japp groaned. You and your melodies? Just give me a name, Poirot tapped his notebook. Patience, mon ami. The name will come. But first, we must wait for the second act. Always in opera, the second act brings the twist. And even as he spoke, a constable entered hurriedly, cap askew. Inspector Japp. Mr. Poirot, there's been another discovery. One of the stagehands found something behind the scenery, something that doesn't belong. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, you see, Japp, the second act begins. The constable's words dropped into the green room like a stone into a still pond. The suspects, who had lingered in uneasy silence after their interviews, stirred and murmured in alarm. Even Japp, hardened by years of sordid crime, straightened sharply. Poirot alone remained perfectly composed. He brushed an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve and inclined his head. Lead us, if you please, he said softly. Let us see this new discovery. For in a drama, it is always the unexpected prop that turns the play. The constable guided them through the maze of backstage corridors to the fly tower, where ropes, sandbags, and painted flats loomed like a forest of shadows. The air smelt of hemp and dust. A burly stagehand, cap in hand, stood awkwardly beside a rolled canvas backdrop. At his feet lay a small leather case, scuffed at the corners, but clearly of quality. Found it tucked behind the scenery for Act 2, the man said nervously. No idea whose it is. Not ours, that's certain. I thought it best not to open it until you arrived. Japp crouched and flipped the latch with a decisive click. Inside lay a small vial, stoppered and labeled in French. Digitaline. Alongside it, neatly folded, was a pair of white silk gloves, faintly stained at the fingertips with a yellowish mark. Digitalis, Japp muttered grimly. Same as the chemist found in the throat spray. Well, that settles it. Someone hid their poison kit right here. The suspects gasped, clustered behind. Lila Hart gave a stifled cry. Alonso crossed himself swiftly. Lady Octavia's fan snapped shut with a crack. Poirot, however, only bent closer, peering at the gloves. His delicate fingers did not touch but hovered, tracing their outline in the air. Curious, he murmured. Very curious indeed. To hide such a case here, in the fly tower. Ah, but it is too convenient. Too? Theatrical Japp frowned. What are you getting at? Poirot straightened, eyes gleaming. Mon ami, criminals are rarely so obliging as to leave their instrument of guilt upon the stage. This, I think, is not the hiding of a culprit, but the planting of a clue. Someone wishes us to look in the wrong direction. The suspects began to speak at once. Protests, accusations, denials. Japp raised his hand. Enough! We'll take this case to the yard, test it, trace it. Meanwhile, none of you leaves the theater. But Poirot, turning slowly, let his gaze linger on each face. Bellini, stiff with indignation. Alonso, pale with melodramatic horror. Lady Octavia, hard as marble. Barrington, sweating copiously. Lila, trembling. Nora, biting her lip. Kovacs, stoic, hale, watchful. Armitage, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Each expression was a mask, yet masks always slip. Let us return, Poirot said at last. "The stage is too drafty for truth. The green room is warmer." Back in that faded chamber, Japp slammed the case on the table. "This," he declared, "is evidence, and one of you put it there. You might as well confess silence." Only the faint ticking of the mantel clock answered. Poirot broke it gently. "No one will confess, mon cher Japp, for the guilty hand believes itself safe, hidden behind lies and appearances. But appearances, they are the least reliable of witnesses." He looked at Lila Hart. "Mademoiselle, you cried out when you saw the gloves." "Why?" Lila's face flushed. Because they look like mine. I wear white gloves in rehearsal. Many do, but these are not mine, I swear it," Alonso sneered. "Convenient denial." Poirot raised a finger. "Careful, signor. Too swift an accusation is itself suspicious." He turned to Kovac. "Madame, you are keeper of costumes. Do these gloves belong to the opera wardrobe?" Kovac examined them with professional eye. "No, ours are coarser for stage use. These are personal gloves, expensive." A lady's Poirot's moustaches twitched. "So, a lady's gloves marked with the stain of digitalis, and left in a case so conveniently discovered. Tell me, Lady Octavia, do you wear gloves such as these?" Her eyes flashed. "I do, Monsieur Poirot." "And so do half the women in London society. Do you mean to accuse me on the strength of a glove?" "Non, madame," Poirot said mildly. "I only note that symbols are chosen with care. Whoever planted this wished to point to a lady, to turn suspicion upon refinement, not coarseness." Japp sighed. "So we're back to guessing games." Poirot shook his head. "Not guessing. Observing. Already the pattern begins to emerge. Consider, my friend, Estelle Reynard was poisoned by her throat spray, an object of intimate habit. The gloves, the vial, the hiding place, they are noise. The signal lies in who knew her ritual and who feared what she might reveal." He looked around the room, his eyes resting briefly on each suspect. For Estelle Reynard, mes amis, was not only a singer. She was a woman with secrets, and someone here feared those secrets would destroy them. The room stirred uneasily. Barrington dabbed his brow. Alonso shifted. Lila clasped her hands tighter. Even the unflappable critic Armitage looked up sharply. Poirot leaned closer, his voice low, compelling. "We must ask ourselves, what was Estelle Reynard about to do? She quarreled with Maestro Bellini, with Alonso, with Barrington, with Lady Octavia. She hinted to the critic of betrayal, of a departure, perhaps even of an engagement. She promised Nora Paris. She touched every one of you with her words, and yet only one of you was desperate enough to silence her." Japp interjected briskly. "But we don't yet know what secret she held." "Just so," Poirot said. "That, Chief Inspector, is our next task. For the motive hides in her heart and perhaps in her letters." He turned suddenly to Nora. "Child, you said she gave you a letter to post, then took it back. Where is it?" Nora looked stricken. I don't know." She placed it back on her vanity. "Perhaps it is still there." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Excellent. We must search again." Minutes later, they stood once more in Estelle Reynard's dressing room. Poirot moved with reverence, as though among relics. On the vanity, under a powder box, he found an envelope, sealed but unaddressed. With Japp's nod, he opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded sheet, covered in Estelle's elegant hand. Poirot read silently, then handed it to Japp. The inspector read aloud. "To whom it may concern, I can no longer endure the lies. Tomorrow night, after the performance, I will announce my decision. I shall leave London, leave this contract, and reveal the truth of what has been kept hidden. No patron, no impresario, no lover shall hold me any longer. I am free." A collective gasp arose. Japp whistled. Well, that's motive enough for half the room. She was going to expose someone. But who? Poirot folded the letter carefully. That, Chief Inspector, is the aria yet unsung, but now we know her death was not about rivalry of voices. It was about truth. She threatened to reveal, and so she was silenced. He turned back to the suspects. One of you feared her words more than anything. One of you knew that, if she spoke, your world would collapse. And so you chose the cruelest silence of all. The suspects shifted, their eyes darting. Poirot watched each tremor, each swallow, each nervous twitch. Then he said softly, "Take comfort, my friends. The curtain has not yet fallen. The finale approaches, but not yet. First, there will be another revelation. Another crime, perhaps, for when guilt trembles, it often strikes again." He replaced the letter, straightened his cuffs, and turned to Jap. "Mon ami, keep them close. None must leave. The killer is cornered, but a cornered beast is most dangerous. Tonight, I think, we will see the second blow." And as Poirot left the dressing room, the air seemed charged, as though the theatre itself held its breath, waiting for the next act in the deadly performance. The Grand Opera did not open its doors that day. By order of Scotland Yard, the evening's performance was cancelled, and a notice in sober black letters was pinned to the gilt doors. Due to unforeseen circumstances, tonight's opera is postponed. Yet even as the outside world muttered in frustration and intrigue, inside the theatre the drama deepened. Constables kept watch in every corridor. Suspects were lodged in separate rooms like unwilling guests at an unwelcome house party. And at the heart of it all moved Hercule Poirot, calm, precise, listening to the pulse of the place as though the building itself whispered clues to him. By late afternoon, Poirot returned to the green room, where Jap awaited him with a pile of reports. The inspector looked haggard. "We've questioned every stagehand, every usher. No one admits to seeing who slipped that case behind the scenery. Half of them swear it wasn't there an hour before. Either they're blind or someone's devilishly clever." Poirot nodded gravely. "The latter, I think. The planting of the case, it was meant to distract, to turn our eyes upon the ladies. But the psychology, Jap, it does not fit. The women here, Lady Octavia, Mademoiselle Hart, Nora, even Madame Kovacs, they wield other weapons. Not poison in a spray. No, the guilty hand is clever, yes, but also careless. For the careless always leave contradiction. Contradictions, eh? You've mentioned that twice now." "What contradictions?" Jap demanded. Poirot tapped his temple. "Trois, mon ami. Small ones. Yet in small lies the great truths." Before Jap could press further, a sharp cry echoed down the corridor. Both men sprang to their feet. A constable burst in, cap askew. "Inspector, Mr. Poirot, there's been another incident." They hurried after him, boots clattering across boards, until they reached a narrow passage leading to the chorus dressing rooms. There, in the half-light, a figure knelt over a motionless body. It was Nora, pale and frantic, clutching at the limp form of Lila Hart. The understudy lay on the ground, her eyes closed, lips faintly blue. She collapsed," Nora sobbed. She was walking back from the lavatory. "She just fell." Jap bent quickly, feeling for a pulse. Alive. Faint, but alive. "Get a doctor, quick." Poirot crouched beside them, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. "Do you smell it, Jap?" "Faint, but familiar. Bitter, medicinal." Jap sniffed grimly. "The same as Reynard's spray." "Exactement, but diluted. A second attempt, clumsy, hurried. Someone feared that Mademoiselle Hart had seen too much or might speak what she knows." Poirot rose, his expression grave. "We have the proof. The killer strikes again." The doctor soon arrived, administering emetics and stimulants. Within minutes, Lila stirred, moaning softly, her eyelids fluttering. Poirot insisted she be carried to a secure room under watch, where she could recover. "No one else must see her until she's strong enough to speak," he told Japp. "For her survival, it is most inconvenient to our murderer." The incident electrified the suspects. Whispers spread like wildfire that the killer had erred, that the understudy had been meant to replace Estelle Reynard, that jealousy cut both ways. Poirot gathered them once more in the green room, though this time the atmosphere was raw, stripped of yesterday's elegance. Fear showed openly now. Sweat, trembling, darting eyes. Poirot stood before them, his small figure radiating control. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is as I said. Another blow has fallen. Twice in 2 nights. You see now, this is no accident. One among you plays a deadly game." But already the threads are tightening. Bellini slammed a fist onto the mantel. "This is madness. Are we to be slaughtered one by one? For what? For a quarrel? For vanity?" Poirot regarded him coolly. "Non, maestro. For fear. It is fear that drives this hand, fear of revelation. And what do we fear most? That which touches our honor, our survival, our reputation." He turned his gaze deliberately to Barrington. "Monsieur, you fear the ruin of your theatre. To lose your star was to lose everything. Perhaps you thought to prevent her departure in the most final way." Barrington blanched. "Nonsense! If I wanted her gone, I'd have cancelled her contract, not her life." Poirot allowed a small shrug. "Perhaps. Yet your desperation is visible." Next he turned to Alonso. "And you, signor, you quarrelled. You feared her overshadowing you. Did you think to rid yourself of a rival?" Alonso flared. "I live for the stage. Without her, my triumph is nothing. Why would I murder the very partner who made my voice soar?" Poirot inclined his head. An argument, but not an answer. He shifted to Lady Octavia. "You, madame, sent the flowers. You warned her. You stand to lose influence if she betrayed London for Paris. Was this your vengeance?" Octavia's eyes glittered. "Do not insult me, Monsieur Poirot. I destroy reputations with whispers, not with chemicals. If I wished her ruined, society would do it. For me," Poirot nodded slowly. "That, madame, I believe." He turned last to Hale, the quiet violinist. "Monsieur Hale, you have said little. Too little, perhaps. Yet you admitted hearing someone weeping before the overture. Was it truly Nora, as she claims? Or was it another?" Hale met Poirot's gaze steadily. "It was not Nora. I know her voice. It was softer, older. I believe it may have been Madame Reynard herself." The room shifted, startled. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, that is significant. She wept not from nerves alone, but from decision. She knew the danger of what she meant to announce." Yes, Japp stepped forward impatiently. "That's all well and good, Poirot, but we still don't know who tried to finish off Hart. Anyone could have slipped something into her tea or handkerchief." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Chief Inspector. The picture sharpens. We have 2 crimes now, bound by the same fear, and soon, I think, the guilty one will expose themselves. For when the net tightens, the fish thrash." He dismissed the gathering and retired alone to Estelle Reynard's dressing room, where he sat in the dim light before the mirror. Her photographs watched him still, their painted smiles mocking. Poirot folded his hands, speaking softly to his own reflection. "Think, Hercule. Who benefits from silence? Who trembles at truth? Barrington fears financial ruin, but murder is not his métier. Lady Octavia has power without risk. Alonso, too vain, too obvious. Bellini, he lies, yes, but out of pride, not panic. Kovacs, a servant's loyalty can curdle. But no, her bitterness is not of this kind. Nora, devotion and fear, but not the intellect for such poison. Then who? Who planted the case? Who struck at Lila? He closed his eyes. The contradictions came back to him, sharp as glass. Bellini had denied entering Estelle's room, yet his cologne lingered there. Alonso had sworn he did not envy her, but his words dripped with rivalry. Lila confessed envy too freely, too pathetically. Lady Octavia claimed indifference to scandal, yet sent flowers heavy with symbolism. Too many lies, but one more than the rest. Poirot opened his eyes suddenly. Yes, that is the crack in the mask. It must be so. When Japp entered an hour later, Poirot was waiting, immaculate as ever. "Mon ami," he said calmly, "the time has come. Gather them all. Tonight we shall have our denouement. In the grand tradition of opera, the final act will be played upon the stage itself." Japp frowned. "You mean to do your usual trick? Assemble them all and give us a lecture?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui. For the theatre is the stage of truth, and in the glare of its lights the guilty cannot keep their masks. Call them, Japp. One by one we shall place them before the curtain. And then, the finale." The inspector, though skeptical, obeyed. And as the evening shadows deepened, the suspects were gathered once more upon the darkened stage, beneath the great chandelier where Estelle Reynard had fallen. The house was empty, but the silence of the velvet seats pressed like 1,000 unseen eyes. Poirot stood before them, his figure small but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "the play is nearly ended. And tonight, the true murderer shall step into the spotlight." The suspects stirred uneasily, each caught in their own shadow of guilt and fear. Above them, the great chandelier swayed slightly, casting fractured light across the stage. Poirot clasped his hands, bowed his head a fraction, and let the silence deepen until it seemed every heartbeat could be heard. Then he raised his eyes, sharp as knives. "And so we begin." The stage of the Grand Opera was transformed into a tribunal. Not a note of music echoed through its rafters, not a murmur from the audience that should have filled its red-plush seats. Only the rustle of uniforms as constables took their stations and the faint groan of the great chandelier swaying high above. The suspects, actors unwilling, performers unwillingly cast, stood in a semicircle under the cruel light. Their shadows fell long across the scuffed boards, each as restless as the hearts that beat behind them. Hercule Poirot, small, precise, immaculate, advanced to the center. He carried no baton, no gavel, no weapon, only his cane and his moustaches, curved with serene certainty. His dark eyes swept across them, weighing, measuring. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, his voice soft but carrying. "Last night, upon this very stage, there was tragedy. Madame Estelle Reynard sang her aria, and with it, her life ended. She did not die by mischance, nor by weakness of the body. No, she died by a hand, deliberate and cunning. And today, that hand has struck again, against Mademoiselle Lila Hart. The murderer is among us still. But the play, it nears its final act." There was a ripple. Bellini's impatient huff, Barrington's damp swallow, Octavia's disdainful snort. Poirot raised a hand. "I have listened to you all. I have watched your gestures, your silences, your lies. 3 contradictions revealed themselves to me. Small things, but comme toujours, the small things betray the great truth. Allow me, if you please, to conduct this opera of deceit to its finale." He turned first to Maestro Bellini. "You told me, Maestro, that you did not enter Madame Reynard's dressing room on the night of her death. And yet her maid Nora swore that you knocked, and she quarreled with you. You denied what another has confessed. Pourquoi? Pride, perhaps. You would not admit being humbled by a singer. But pride, though a vice, is not murder. You lied for vanity, not for guilt." Bellini flushed darkly, but said nothing. Poirot moved to Vittorio Alonso. "Signor, you claimed you did not envy Estelle. Yet every gesture, Every syllable dripped with rivalry. You loved her voice, you said, but you feared her overshadowing you. Still, you are right. Without her, your glory is diminished. For you, murder would not be victory, but defeat. You lied about your heart, but not about your hand. Alonso spread his cloak theatrically, but his silence was admission enough. Poirot's eyes slid to Lady Octavia Vaughan. Madame, you declared you destroy reputations with whispers, not with poison. You sent camellias and a gardenia, an insult hidden in perfume, but though your pride is great, your method is social, not chemical. No, you did not soil your gloves with digitalis. You lied only to hide your cruelty, not a crime. Octavia's lips thinned, yet she remained marble still. He paused deliberately before Barrington, the impresario. Sweat gleamed on the man's temples. Poirot's voice sharpened. You, Monsieur Barrington, feared most of all the ruin of your theatre. Madame Renard threatened to leave, to take her triumphs to Paris. Your fortune, your career, everything balanced upon her voice. Did you not say yourself that her departure would destroy you? And then, behold, she dies. How convenient, too convenient, and yet... Poirot's tone softened. You are a man of bluster, not precision. Poison in a spray, concealed with cunning, that is not your style. You would bully, threaten, bargain. You are guilty of weakness, but not of murder. Barrington sagged in relief, only to stiffen again as Poirot's eyes turned elsewhere. At last, Poirot walked slowly, deliberately, to the smallest figure among them. Nora, the maid, shrank beneath his gaze. And you, child. You swore you did not touch the spray. You swore you loved her. I believe you, but love is not innocence. Devotion may be blind, yet not malicious. No, I do not think you, with your clumsy tears, could plan so subtle a murder. Nora whimpered softly, covering her face. Poirot pivoted, sharp as a dancer, his gaze fixed upon Madame Kovacs, the wardrobe mistress. And you, Madame, you pricked your finger, you pinned the corsage, you had her trust, but you also had resignation. Your bitterness is quiet, your loyalty dull. Not poison, but silence is your weapon. No, you did not kill her. A murmur swept through the semicircle. One by one, Poirot had dismissed them. Bellini, Alonso, Octavia, Barrington, Nora, Kovacs. Only three remained. Hale, the violinist, Armitage, the critic, and Lila Hart, pale as a ghost in her chair. Poirot turned to Hale. You, Monsieur Violinist, you said you heard a woman weeping before the overture. You swore it was Estelle herself. That is curious, for if it were Estelle, she would have been in her dressing room, not within earshot of the fly gallery. Non, it was someone else. Either your ears deceived you, or your words conceal another truth. But you, monsieur, are a man of observation, not action. You listen, you do not strike. You did not poison. Hale bowed his head gravely. Accepting absolution or accusation, none could tell. Poirot's eyes shifted to Armitage. And you, Monsieur Critic, you write reputations into life or death. You lunched with Estelle, you teased of scandal. You knew of her secret intentions. She confided more to you than she ought, and yet you are a man who thrives on exposure, on revelation. You wanted her to speak, to betray, to give you copy for your column. You had no reason to silence her tongue. None. You are guilty of cruelty of pen, not of hand. Armitage smirked faintly, though his knuckles whitened on his notebook. The room stilled. Only one remained. Lila Hart, the understudy, fragile in her chair, recovering from the attempt on her life. All eyes turned toward her. She trembled visibly. Poirot's voice softened, yet it cut sharper than any blade. Mademoiselle Hart, the understudy, the shadow, always near, never center. You admitted your envy, yes. You confessed your fear. You tidied the spray. You placed it on the tray. You knew her ritual as no one else did, and you alone had the intimacy of observation, the resentment of a life in shade. Is it not true that you longed for the stage, not beside her, but in place of her? Lila's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands twisted in her lap. Poirot pressed on, inexorable. And then, when suspicion grew, when you feared the little grey cells might find you out, you struck again. You sought to silence yourself. How clever to play the victim, to collapse, to draw pity, to deflect suspicion. But alas, you misjudged the dose. You lived, a horrified murmur swept the semicircle. Lila's eyes darted from face to face. At last, words spilled, high and broken. No, you don't understand. I didn't mean— Poirot raised his hand, silencing her. You meant to live in the light, mademoiselle. You meant to seize the stage that Estelle would not yield. But ambition, it is a cruel master. You killed not for love, not for honor, but for vanity. And vanity, always, betrays itself. Lila's composure shattered. She sprang from her chair, eyes wild. She mocked me. Every day she mocked me. I had the voice, I had the talent, but she laughed, always laughed. She said I would never sing beyond the chorus. I wanted one chance, just one. I only meant to— Her words broke into sobs. Japp stepped forward, grim. That's enough. Constables, take her, but Poirot lifted a hand once more. Wait. Let her finish. Lila sank to her knees, weeping. I only put a little in the spray, enough to make her falter. Enough that she could not sing, that they would call upon me. But she died. I didn't mean her to die. And then you all looked at me. I thought you knew. I thought I had to. So I took the vial myself, only a little, to make it seem I too was a victim. But I lived. Silence. Only her sobbing echoed in the vast theatre. Poirot bowed his head. The tragedy of envy, mes amis. A talent wasted, not because it was absent, but because bitterness poisoned it. Estelle Reynard is dead, not by fate, but by the vanity of one who could not wait her turn. Japp gestured, and the constables lifted Lila gently to her feet, leading her away. Her sobs faded down the corridor like a dying aria. The remaining suspects stood stunned. Bellini muttered a prayer in Italian. Alonso crossed himself again. Lady Octavia turned her face away. Barrington sagged against the wall. Only Poirot remained composed, folding his hands upon his cane. He turned at last to Japp. You see, mon ami, it is as I always say. It is not the grand gesture, not the glove, not the planted case that tells the truth. It is the small contradiction, the envy hidden in plain confession. Mademoiselle Hart betrayed herself from the very first Japp exhaled. Weary. You're a devil, Poirot. A clever little devil. Well, that's the case. Rapt, Poirot smiled faintly. No, not rapt. A life is ended, a career destroyed. Justice, yes, but harmony? That is harder to find. He looked up at the chandelier, glittering above the empty seats. The curtain falls, yet the music lingers. Such is always the tragedy of crime. And of art. And with that, Hercule Poirot turned, cane tapping softly, and departed the stage of the Grand Opera, leaving behind silence, sorrow, and the echo of envy's fatal song. The theatre was still again. The constables had led Lila Hart away, her sobs trailing into silence. The others dispersed slowly, as though reluctant to leave the stage that had transformed into a courtroom. But Poirot remained where he stood, gazing up at the chandelier, whose crystal drops shimmered in the dim light. The house was empty, yet in his mind it was filled again. With the applause, with Estelle Reynard's last aria cut short, with the sudden gasp that became her death. Chief Inspector Japp came back onto the stage, pulling his coat tighter. Well, that's the end of it, Poirot. She confessed, plain as day. Jealous understudy, poisoned spray, fatal mistake. Tragic, yes, but open and shut. Poirot turned his head slowly, his eyes reflective. Open, yes. Shut. Ah, mon ami, not so quickly. The confession, it was real, but incomplete. She admitted her envy, her action. Yet what of the letter Estelle wrote? What truth did she mean to reveal? Lila's envy explains her hand, but not Estelle's fear. Japp frowned. So you think there's more behind it? Poirot's lips curved into the faintest smile. There is always more. Human nature is never so simple. Envy was the spark, yes, but perhaps another supplied the tinder. They left the stage together and returned to the green room, now almost deserted. Only Felix Armitage, the critic, lingered in a corner, scribbling furiously. He looked up with a smirk. Well, Monsieur Poirot, you've given me the copy of a lifetime. The fall of a diva and the rise and fall again of her understudy. The public will eat it. Up Poirot regarded him steadily. You are swift with your pen, Monsieur Armitage. Perhaps too swift. Be careful that you do not write more than you truly know. Armitage chuckled. I write to entertain, not to edify. Truth is pliable in print. Poirot inclined his head politely, but said no more. Japp muttered under his breath about bloodthirsty journalists, and together they left Armitage to his ink. Later, Poirot sought the quiet of Estelle Renard's dressing room one last time. The mirror still bore her photographs. The teacup sat untouched. The corsage box lay open. He closed the lid gently, almost reverently. His eyes wandered to the envelope with her unfinished letter, the threat of revelation. He reread the words, lips moving silently. I shall leave London, leave this contract, and reveal the truth of what has been kept hidden. Reveal the truth, Poirot murmured. But what truth, Estelle? That you quarrelled, that you were vain, that you sought Paris? Non, these are trivialities. This was something greater, and it died with you. He stood in silence for several moments, then carefully replaced the letter beneath the powder box. The case was solved, but the mystery was not wholly satisfied. Poirot disliked loose threads. The next morning dawned grey over London, the city buzzing with scandal. Papers screamed of opera poisoner caught, jealous understudy confesses, and tragedy of the Grand Opera. Outside Scotland Yard, reporters clustered like gulls. Inside, Japp filed his report with weary satisfaction. Poirot, sipping his chocolate, listened patiently as Japp read aloud. The suspect Lila Hart has been remanded, having confessed to poisoning the throat spray of the late Madame Reynard with the intent of incapacitation, resulting in death. Motive: envy of professional advancement. There. Concise and factual. Poirot set down his cup. Concise, yes. Factual. I cannot say. Japp rolled his eyes. Oh, don't start again. What more do you want? She confessed. Oui, she confessed. But her confession, it was partial. Did she know the poison would kill? Perhaps not. Did she act alone? That is another question entirely. Poirot tapped his moustache. She admitted she took only a little to make Estelle falter. But the dose, so strong, so fatal. Too much for mere faltering. Did she overestimate, or did another adjust? Japp frowned. You think someone else topped up the spray after her? Perhaps. Or perhaps she lied to soften her crime. But recall another case, conveniently found with gloves and digitalis. A red herring. Who planted it? Not Lila. She was too consumed by fear to weave such misdirection. No, there is another hand in this play. Not the murderer, perhaps, but an accomplice or a manipulator. Japp muttered, always one more twist with you, Poirot. But the Crown satisfied. Case closed, Poirot gave a small, Sigh. So it is with justice, mon ami. It accepts enough. But truth demands all. A week later, the Grand Opera reopened with a somber gala in Estelle Reynard's memory. The chandeliers blazed again, the velvet seats filled, but the air was heavy with ghosts. Poirot attended, seated discreetly in a box. The program was dedicated to her, yet whispers persisted of scandal, of Lila's trial, of hidden truths left untold. When the curtain fell that night, Poirot remained a moment longer, staring at the empty stage. Japp joined him, tugging at his gloves. "Well, Poirot, I suppose you'll miss your opera, now the excitement's over." Poirot shook his head gently. The excitement, mon ami, was not the pleasure. It was the sorrow. A voice silenced too soon, a girl destroyed by envy, and yet, behind it, I still sense a shadow. A truth untold. Japp clapped him on the shoulder. "You'll puzzle yourself into the grave. Come along, let's get a brandy." Poirot smiled faintly and rose. "Perhaps you are right. But still, I wonder." In the weeks that followed, Lila Hart's trial gripped London. She stood pale in the dock, confessing through tears, pleading she had only meant to humble Estelle, not kill her. The court condemned her nonetheless. She was sentenced not to death, for the jury, swayed by her frailty, recommended mercy, but to a long imprisonment. Newspapers reveled in the scandal. Society whispered that the opera would never recover its luster. Poirot did not attend the trial. He already knew the verdict. But one evening, he sat alone in his apartment, reflecting. The fire crackled softly. The clock ticked with neat precision. Poirot spoke to himself, as he often did. She confessed, yes. She poisoned the spray, yet Estelle's letter, the truth shall be revealed. That truth, it sleeps still. Perhaps it was a lover's secret, perhaps a financial scandal, perhaps something more. Lila silenced her voice. But the truth, it remains unspoken. He rose, adjusting his cuffs. But perhaps it is best so. Some truths destroy more than lies. And Hercule Poirot, he is not merely the hunter of criminals, he is also the guardian of order. Sometimes, to preserve harmony, the truth must remain behind the curtain. And so the case of murder at the Grand Opera concluded, outwardly solved, yet inwardly unsettled. Estelle Reynard's grave was adorned with flowers. Lila Hart faded into obscurity. The impresario patched his theatre with money and reputation. Lady Octavia whispered her versions of events at dinner tables. Bellini conducted again, though with less pride. Alonso sang with fiercer vanity. Nora wept and served another mistress. The opera played on, as opera always does, tragedy woven into its fabric. But in a quiet flat in London, Hercule Poirot kept Estelle's letter among his papers. Sometimes, when the city was still, he read it again and wondered. He had unmasked the murderer, yes. Justice had been done. Yet the greater mystery, the truth Estelle meant to proclaim, remained like a final note unresolved, hanging in the air long after the orchestra had ceased, and Poirot, ever precise, ever reflective, would smooth his moustaches and whisper, "Order is restored." But harmony, harmony, is another matter. He would then close the letter, place it gently back in its envelope, and wait for the next summons to the stage of crime where the play of human folly would begin anew. The night of Estelle Reynard's death had long since passed into story. The scandal cooled. Lila Hart faded into prison silence. Yet for Poirot, the matter was never quite settled. A puzzle unfinished sits uneasily with him, like a crooked picture on a wall. He had unmasked the hand that poured the poison, yes, but the shadow behind Estelle's final letter, the promise of truth revealed, still murmured at the edge of his thoughts. It was weeks later, on a crisp March morning, when resolution came. Poirot was at his breakfast table, poring over his eggs and perfectly buttered toast, when a familiar knock came to his door. Chief Inspector Japp entered, carrying a folder thick with papers. "Thought you'd like to see this," Japp said, laying it down. The Yard traced Reynard's finances. Seems she'd been blackmailed for months. Checks, jewelry pawned, that sort of thing. And look here. He produced a small ledger, found in Estelle's locked trunk, recently delivered from Paris. Names, dates, payments. At the bottom, one name underlined twice. Lionel Barrington. Poirot's brows arched. Tiens. The impresario Japp nodded grimly. She was going to expose him, Poirot. She discovered he'd siphoned funds from the opera, dressing it up as her extravagant salary. Clever. Made her the scapegoat in advance. If she'd spoken, he'd have been ruined. Poirot leaned back, eyes closing briefly. So, the truth Estelle meant to reveal, not a scandal of the heart, but of money. Barrington's ruin, hidden behind her glittering name. He feared exposure, and he planted the case with gloves and vial. To misdirect us, to let the understudy bear the blame, entire Japp slammed the file shut. But it was Lila who put the poison in the spray. Her confession sticks. Barrington only took advantage. That's all. Poirot opened his eyes, sharp as ever. Mais non, mon ami. Lila's drop was small, designed only to weaken. It was Barrington who found opportunity to strengthen it, to ensure death. He knew her ritual too. He arranged her contracts, her timings, even her entrances. He returned with Lady Octavia that evening and lingered in the room while all others bustled. A moment only, but enough to tip envy into murder. Japp scowled. We've no proof, Poirot. He's covered his tracks. Poirot smiled faintly. No proof fit for court, perhaps. But truth does not always need the gavel. Already Barrington's reputation declines. The ledger will see to that. He will not face the rope, but he will face the slower punishment, the ruin of his name, the collapse of his theatre. And is that not in its way justice? Japp grunted. I suppose. Well, between Hart's envy and Barrington's greed, they finished her off between them. Poor woman never stood a chance, Poirot rose, carefully wiping his fingers upon a napkin. He crossed to the window, where London bustled below, life indifferent to tragedy. That is the lesson, mon ami. Crime is rarely pure. It is a duet, sometimes a chorus. Envy sings, greed accompanies. Vanity provides the refrain. Estelle Reynard died not because one girl coveted the stage, nor because one man feared disgrace, but because both their weaknesses joined in harmony most fatal. C'est la condition humaine. Japp gave a snort. You and your philosophy. All I know is I've got paperwork to finish. Poirot turned, mustaches impeccable, his eyes suddenly twinkling with humor. And I, mon cher Japp, have symmetry restored. The curtain may fall at last. That evening, Poirot attended the opera one final time. A new soprano sang in Estelle's place, her voice bright but lacking the tragic weight of memory. The audience applauded politely, grateful for continuity. Yet in Poirot's box, silence reigned. As the final notes swelled and the chandelier glittered, Poirot leaned back. Encore une fois, he whispered. The stage has its music, and the world has its order. But harmony, mes amis, that is rare. And so we cherish it all the more. He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and with perfect composure departed into the night, leaving behind the echo of a mystery resolved, and the reminder that even in crime, as in opera, it is the smallest notes that bring down the house.